My name is Margaret Lynn Harper. I'm 67 years old, and for almost 50 years, I have been a wife, a mother, and the quiet backbone of Willow Creek Farm, a small organic orchard nestled in the green hills of Vermont. My hands, knotted with arthritis, still remember every motion: kneading bread dough, pruning the apple trees at sunrise, or loading crates with Richard, my late husband. Every morning carried the scent of apples, fresh soil, and the warm aroma of breakfast. I thought we had built everything together: a home, a farm, a family. But now that Richard is gone, I feel the fragile truth. Perhaps it wasn't enough to keep our family close. 3 weeks ago, I laid him to rest. Richard passed from pancreatic cancer after 14 long months of watching a strong, grounded man slowly fade. He shielded the children from his suffering, hoping to give them more time without the shadow of illness. I agreed to his wishes because I loved him, but I already knew the reality. Our children, Lucas and Emily, had grown distant long before the diagnosis. Lucas, the eldest, had built a high-powered finance career in New York, visiting home rarely, sometimes not at all for months. Emily bounced from one business venture to another, always funded by Richard's savings, always asking for just one more loan or favor. I had hoped that grief would bring them back, remind them of the orchard, our family dinners, and the love that built this home. But when they arrived for the funeral, I didn't see children mourning their father. I saw young professionals calculating an inheritance. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the worn wood of our table. I suggested we sort through Richard's belongings together the next day, a gentle mother's gesture to honor memory. But they had other ideas. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains Richard and I had picked out decades ago. I made coffee, the simple, homey kind he preferred, and waited at the kitchen table. Lucas and Emily appeared, dressed as if for a business meeting, not for a family gathering. Lucas in a tailored jacket, Emily in a crisp blouse and perfectly styled hair. "Mom, we've talked," Lucas began, setting his mug down carefully. Emily nodded. "We think it's time to settle things. The farm, the house, the estate." The words hit me like a winter wind. I had tended these trees through snowstorms and heat waves, driven the tractor through endless fields, baked pies for fundraisers, delivered fruit to neighbors and local charities. And now they spoke of selling everything, replacing decades of care with cold calculations. I realized then that there would be no discussion tomorrow. They were not grieving. They were executing a plan. And in that moment, a quiet, fierce determination began to grow within me. I would not let the legacy of Willow Creek Farm, or the life Richard and I built together, be destroyed. The next morning, Lucas smirked as he poured his imported coffee, glancing at me over the rim of his mug. "If your luck runs out, at least half of the sale will go to me," he said, the words dripping with casual arrogance. Meanwhile, Emily giggled softly, placing her perfectly manicured hand on the kitchen table, as if she were in a boardroom, not her family home. Richard's old watch, the one I had bought him for their 25th anniversary, lay in its velvet box on the counter. I remembered the day I picked it out, the way his eyes had lit up when he opened it. Now, Lucas and Emily handled it as if it were a prop in a corporate transaction, not a symbol of a lifetime of love and care. "You don't understand, Mom," Emily said smoothly. "It's just practical. You can't run the farm and the house alone. It's too much." Her words, meant to sound caring, felt like cold judgment. I had handled payroll when we couldn't afford an assistant, driven the tractor through blizzards, baked pies for every town fundraiser, and delivered crates of fruit to local charities. Too much? I thought, biting back the sting in my chest. Lucas leaned forward, sliding a sleek folder across the table. "Richard wanted this," he said. opening it to reveal documents printed on his corporate letterhead. The signature at the bottom was too neat, too perfect. Richard's handwriting had been shaky these last months, his hands trembling from medication. This wasn't his work. "This isn't from our lawyer," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. "Richard was lucid when he signed it." Lucas waved a hand dismissively. "He wanted Melissa and me to take over, a fresh start. There's a developer willing to pay $7 million for the land. You'd be taken care of." I felt my blood boil. $7 million? They would destroy decades of labor, sustainability, and community for a handful of cash. "You're talking about selling Richard's life's work," I said softly, my hands clenching. Emily's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "It's for your own good, Mom. Sunnyvale Estates. Activities, friends your age, a comfortable life." I stood, placing the coffee mugs in the sink, and reached for the small fireproof box I had kept hidden behind Richard's old flannel shirts. Inside lay the original deed to 18 acres of prime orchard land, purchased in my maiden name long before our marriage. Land with water rights essential for the farm's survival. I let them believe they had won. "Ready?" I asked, allowing Emily to help me to the car. As we drove past the blooming fields and familiar streets, Lucas suddenly turned onto a remote gravel road. 20 minutes later, he pulled over. "This is where you get off, Mom," he said, feigning casualness. Emily looked uneasy. "Darren, wait!" But I didn't. I stepped out, clutching my small suitcase, feeling the weight of betrayal and determination in equal measure. The car disappeared down the dusty road, leaving me standing alone. They thought I was powerless, but I held the truth in my hands. The 18 acres, the water rights, they had no idea what I possessed. And now, my next move would change everything. Standing alone on the gravel road, I felt the spring wind tug at my coat, carrying the faint scent of apple blossoms from the distant orchard. My flats weren't ideal for walking on loose stones, but it didn't matter. Every step solidified a purpose that had been simmering inside me for weeks. Betrayal burned hot, but beneath it was clarity. I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. I unfolded the small map I always kept in my purse and traced the route to Miller's General Store, a place that had been at the heart of Hazelbrook for decades. The store's faded sign swung slightly in the breeze, and I knew that behind its modest counter, Ray Miller would still remember me as Margaret, not just as the widow of Richard Harper. I had relied on Ray countless times. He knew every corner of the town and the people who lived there. And now I would need every bit of that network. Inside, the familiar scent of dust, pine cleaner, and canned goods greeted me. Ray emerged from the back, wiping his hands on a frayed apron. "Margaret, you look tired. Everything all right?" I forced a small smile. "Long day, Ray. Just needed a place to think." He glanced at my suitcase, concern flickering across his face. "Need to use the phone? There's a quiet corner in the back." I nodded and followed him past shelves of pickled peaches and flour sacks to the small office. My fingers trembled slightly as I dialed the number I had memorized months ago. The office of Harold Jennings, our family lawyer. "Margaret?" Harold's voice was surprised, though steady. "I expected to see you at the will reading." "The will reading," I repeated, my voice firm. "It seems there's a problem. A document presented yesterday doesn't match the file we updated last year. I need your help and your discretion." He didn't hesitate. "Come by my office. We'll sort it out." I hung up and turned to Ray. "Do you sell prepaid phones?" He nodded. "One, please, and some bottled water." He refused payment, insisting I take them on the house. His kindness struck me harder than I expected. I didn't cry, not yet, but gratitude warmed the ache in my chest. Harold's office was a short walk from the store, an old Victorian house with steep stairs and a polished wooden banister. When I entered, Harold looked at me with a mixture of concern and curiosity. I laid out the story: the fake will, the boardroom-like kitchen discussion, the roadside abandonment, every detail. He listened without interruption, only furrowing his brow deeper as I pulled the fireproof box from my bag and revealed the original deed to the 18 acres. Harold's eyes widened. "Margaret, this changes everything. These 18 acres with full water rights give you leverage. Without your consent, they can't touch the farm." I exhaled slowly, relief mixing with a simmering determination. My children thought they could corner me. They underestimated the soil beneath their feet, the legacy Richard and I had built. I wasn't just fighting for land. I was fighting for the truth, for the orchard, for the life we had nurtured. Harold nodded, already plotting our next legal moves. "We'll file an injunction immediately. Any transfer of ownership related to the farm will be frozen." I left his office that afternoon with renewed purpose. The road ahead was long, and the fight with Lucas and Emily was just beginning. But for the first time in days, I felt a surge of power. They had underestimated me. They had overlooked what truly mattered. And now, it was time for them to see that Margaret Lynn Harper would not be silenced or defeated. The next morning, I awoke before dawn, as I had for decades, when the orchard was cloaked in mist and the air smelled of damp earth and apple blossoms. But this morning wasn't for pruning trees or tending to soil. It was for strategy. I brewed a strong pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling my modest apartment above the bakery on Main Street. The scent reminded me of simpler times, of mornings spent with Richard discussing planting schedules and irrigation plans. I pulled out the documents Harold had prepared. The injunction was filed, but the real work had just begun. Lucas and Emily didn't understand the depth of the farm's infrastructure, nor did they grasp the value of the water rights I had carefully secured decades ago. They saw only property, a commodity to sell and divide. I saw history, life, and sustenance, the very heart of Hazelbrook. By mid-morning, I was on the phone with a local reporter, someone I trusted, to explain that the orchard was under legal protection. Transparency was key. I didn't want Lucas and Emily to manipulate public opinion. "This isn't about revenge," I emphasized during the call. "It's about protecting a legacy, ensuring the land is preserved for future generations." The reporter nodded, scribbling notes, and promised to cover the story. After the call, I drove past the edge of the orchard, keeping my distance, but observing every detail. The trees were waking from winter, buds swelling with the promise of fruit. The workers, mostly elderly locals, waved as I passed. They didn't know the full story, but they understood the importance of what we were protecting. I felt a quiet resolve settle in me. This wasn't just about stopping Lucas and Emily. It was about ensuring the community, the life around this land, could endure. By afternoon, Harold and I met to plan our next move. The injunction halted the immediate sale, but the developers and my children were already scheming around it. Harold suggested contacting the county zoning office to confirm that no permit could be issued without my consent. I agreed. Knowledge was power, and I intended to wield it precisely. Later, I visited the library, gathering historical maps and documents about Hazelbrook orchards. Each page I handled reminded me of the sweat, tears, and dedication poured into this land. I imagined Richard beside me, his calm, steady presence guiding every decision. Though he was gone, his spirit was embedded in every tree, every row of soil, every memory. As the sun dipped behind the hills, I returned to my apartment, exhausted but determined. I sipped tea on the balcony, listening to the distant laughter of children and the rhythmic hum of everyday life. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. Tomorrow, I would confront Lucas and Emily legally, emotionally, and morally. I wasn't naive. I knew they would resist, they would manipulate, and they would try to undermine me. But for the first time since Richard's passing, I felt empowered, not helpless. They had underestimated Margaret Lynn Harper. They had forgotten that this wasn't just land. They were dealing with a woman who understood legacy, resilience, and the true value of family. And I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Hazelbrook Orchards would endure, and so would I. The following morning, sunlight spilled through the small kitchen window of my apartment, warming the worn wooden table where I had spread out maps, legal papers, and notes. I sipped coffee slowly, letting the heat seep into my hands. Today, I would confront Lucas and Emily, not in anger, not in panic, but with precision and clarity. By mid-morning, I received a call from Harold. "They're restless," he said, voice calm but firm. "Lucas is trying to rally the developers. Emily has been calling investors. They believe the injunction is temporary, that they can outmaneuver you." I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reveal victory, but signals patience. They had forgotten the foundation beneath my feet, the land itself, the water rights, the decades of careful planning. They were playing checkers while I played chess. I arrived at the Harper family estate, the sprawling house Richard and I had helped maintain over the years, though it now felt foreign with Lucas and Emily moving like strangers through its rooms. Emily greeted me first, her smile tight, a practiced mask of civility. "Mom," she said lightly, "we should talk." I nodded and followed her to the living room. Lucas entered last, blazer perfectly pressed, eyes calculating. He spoke first. "Margaret, this injunction is inconvenient. We can work around it. Let's be reasonable." Who? His voice held that same patronizing tone he had used at breakfast weeks ago. Reasonable. That word echoed in my mind. They thought reason meant bending me to their will. I let them speak, letting their confidence build, all the while listening, observing, measuring. When they paused, I set my coffee down and spoke deliberately. "Do you truly understand what you're asking? Selling this orchard is not just a transaction. It's erasing decades of labor, love, and community." Their expressions flickered. Lucas's mask cracked for a fraction of a second. Emily's gaze wavered. I continued. "I've retained full legal control over the most critical portions of this land, including the water rights. No sale, no development, no compromise can happen without my consent." Emily shifted uncomfortably. We didn't know there was more land, more rights." "You didn't look," I replied gently but firmly. "You assumed ignorance would be my weakness." Lucas leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Margaret, we can negotiate. This doesn't have to be a battle." I shook my head slowly. "It's not a battle. It's truth. And truth cannot be negotiated away. I have spent my life here, nurturing this land, protecting it. You cannot erase that with contracts or corporate tactics." For a long moment, silence filled the room. The tension was palpable, a living thing. Then Emily spoke, voice trembling slightly. "Mom, we just wanted things to be simpler. For you, for us." I studied her face. There was a flicker of remorse, but it was overshadowed by greed and fear. "Simpler?" I said softly. "The path you chose was never about simplicity. It was about control, about profit. You cannot understand the weight of legacy if you only measure it in dollars." Lucas finally rose, frustration boiling over. "You're being obstinate." I stood as well, meeting his gaze without flinching. "No, I'm being responsible. I'm protecting what you've tried to destroy. And make no mistake, I will protect it, legally, morally, and personally. Hazelbrook Orchards is not yours to sell. It belongs to history, to community, and yes, to me." They looked at me, finally seeing not a frail mother, but a force that could not be moved. And in that moment, I felt a surge of calm triumph. They had underestimated Margaret Lynn Harper, and that, I realized, was their greatest mistake. That evening, I returned to my modest apartment above the bakery, the aroma of fresh bread greeting me like an old friend. I set my suitcase down and opened the fireproof box, laying out the original deed and water rights documents across the table. Each paper was a reminder, not of wealth, but of responsibility, of the promise Richard and I had made to this land decades ago. I thought about Lucas and Emily, their arrogance, their certainty that they could manipulate and rush me. They had underestimated me, and that mistake would cost them. But I didn't want revenge in the way they expected. I wanted control, clarity, and the knowledge that the orchard would survive intact. I would use the law, my knowledge, and my persistence to ensure that nothing and no one could dismantle what we had built. Harold called as I organized my papers. "Margaret, we need a strategy," he said. His voice was calm but practical. "We've frozen the development, but they're already trying to find loopholes. You need to be proactive. I suggest documenting everything, every conversation, every visit, every attempt to pressure you. Keep a clear record." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I'll do it. I'll make sure there's no ambiguity. No room for them to claim ignorance." That night, I sat by the window, listening to the soft rustling of the apple trees in the orchard below. The moonlight traced silver lines along the branches, and I thought about Richard, about the mornings we had spent pruning, the long summer evenings we had watched the sun set behind the hills. Those memories were my anchor. I wasn't afraid, not anymore. Over the next few days, I created a detailed plan. I cataloged the land, checked every legal description, and marked the boundaries of the original property I had purchased in my maiden name. I reached out to the Hazelbrook Agricultural Cooperative, sharing selective information to ensure the water rights would be respected and protected. I drafted letters to the developers, clearly stating that any sale or alteration of the land without my consent would be legally contested. Meanwhile, I received subtle updates from Harold. Lucas had made several phone calls, trying to pressure investors, while Emily had sent frantic emails, attempting to negotiate shortcuts. They were restless, frustrated, and increasingly aware that I was no longer the passive figure they had assumed. Every attempt to manipulate me only strengthened my resolve. One afternoon, as I walked past the old apple orchards, I saw a group of teenagers helping to prune the trees. They were part of a community program I had helped start years ago. Their laughter and curiosity reminded me of why I was fighting. This land was more than property, it was legacy, history, and life itself. I realized then that I had grown stronger through grief and betrayal. I was no longer just Margaret Lynn Harper, a widow navigating her children's greed. I was the guardian of Hazelbrook Orchards. Every legal document, every phone call, every step I took reinforced my authority. I would not allow anyone to erase decades of dedication and love. As night fell, I looked out over the orchards, feeling a profound sense of purpose. Lucas and Emily could attempt to challenge me. They could use every trick in their arsenal, but I had something they would never understand: knowledge, patience, and unwavering dedication. Hazelbrook Orchards would survive, and I, Margaret Lynn Harper, would ensure it. The next morning, I awoke early, the sunlight spilling across the small apartment balcony, where a few potted herbs basked in the spring warmth. I brewed a simple cup of coffee, the rich scent reminding me of mornings with Richard. But today, there was no quiet reflection today. I had work to do. I sat at the tiny kitchen table, organizing my correspondence. Letters to the developer, notes for Harold, and copies of every document related to the land and water rights. I drafted a carefully worded letter to Lucas and Emily, not a confrontation, but a clear assertion. Hazelbrook orchards will not be sold or altered without my consent. Any attempt to circumvent this will be met with legal action. I didn't send it yet. I wanted them to feel the anticipation, the slow realization that I was prepared and vigilant. By mid-morning, Harold called. "Margaret, I've reviewed the documents you sent over. Everything is in order. Your control over the critical parcels and water rights is solid. Lucas and Emily may try to challenge it, but they have no legal standing without your approval." I felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of calm power. The battle wasn't over, but the first moves were mine. "Thank you, Harold. I want to make sure they understand the seriousness of this, not with anger, but with certainty." Over the next few days, Lucas and Emily's attempts became more desperate. Harold updated me regularly. "Lucas called the developers again today. He's panicking. They know about the deed, the water rights. They can't touch it." Emily sent an email demanding a meeting, but I advised against responding until they calmed down. I watched their frantic efforts from a distance, my heart steady. I would not rise to their bait. Instead, I continued my work in the orchard, helping the cooperative with the seedlings and pruning, teaching young farmers about sustainable techniques, sharing the knowledge Richard and I had accumulated over decades. Each interaction strengthened my resolve. Each day reaffirmed my purpose. One afternoon, as I walked along the old dirt road winding through the orchard, I noticed a pair of teenagers carrying buckets of water to newly planted saplings. I smiled, remembering my own youth and the afternoons I had spent with Richard, teaching me how to gauge soil moisture and sunlight. The orchard was alive, not just with trees, but with memories, lessons, and community. This was what I was protecting. That evening, I finally sent the letter to Lucas and Emily, carefully worded, precise, and firm. I included copies of the deed, highlighting the water rights and the legal safeguards in place. I didn't use anger, only clarity. It was a warning, not a threat. I was aware, prepared, and in control. Within hours, Harold called with an update. "Margaret, they read it." Lucas left a message asking for a phone call. Emily emailed a series of frantic questions. "They are realizing you weren't bluffing. They thought they could manipulate you, but they were wrong." I placed the phone down and looked out at the orchard. The trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, the blossoms delicate and white against the deep green. I thought about the decades Richard and I had invested in this land, about the lessons we had passed on to the community, and about the future I was safeguarding. Lucas and Emily could be impatient, manipulative, or even cunning, but I had patience, knowledge, and history on my side. Hazelbrook orchards would endure, and I would endure with it, strong, resolute, and unshaken. As night fell, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The storm they had tried to conjure had passed only to reveal a guardian stronger than they had imagined. The following morning, I awoke to the faint sounds of Hazelbrook stirring. Birds chirped in the orchard, and somewhere in the distance, the low hum of a tractor reminded me that life carried on, indifferent to human schemes. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the warmth grounding me. Today, I knew, Lucas and Emily would try again. They always did when cornered. But I was ready. By mid-morning, Harold called with news. "Margaret, they've sent an email outlining a list of demands. They want unrestricted access to the orchard, insisting they have rights to manage it while you figure out your retirement." I read the message carefully, the words sharp and condescending, but I felt no anger, only a cool, measured resolve. They thought I would panic, that I would compromise, that I would cede control to preserve a false sense of peace. They were wrong. I spent the next hour drafting my response. I did not argue, I did not plead. I reminded them of the deed, the water rights, and the legal protections in place. I included a note for emphasis. Any unauthorized action will be considered a breach of law and subject to immediate legal intervention. Hazelbrook Orchards remains under my sole direction. Later that day, I visited the orchard. The new saplings, planted under my supervision, swayed gently in the breeze. As I moved through the rows, pruning and checking irrigation lines, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The orchard wasn't just land, it was life, history, and future, all interwoven. Lucas and Emily couldn't understand that. They never had. By evening, Harold reported that the tension had escalated. Lucas called, attempting to assert dominance with a mixture of charm and threat. I answered the phone, my voice calm, unwavering. He tried to manipulate, reminding me of family ties and obligations, but I listened, letting him unravel his own frustration. When he finished, I said nothing beyond, "Hazelbrook Orchards is my responsibility. I will not compromise the land or the lessons it teaches. Consult Harold if you have questions about legality. Goodbye." The line went silent. Emily followed with a flurry of frantic texts, demanding meetings, insisting on dialogue. But I knew that dialogue on their terms would only give them leverage. Instead, I focused on the practical, coordinating with the Hazelbrook Agricultural Cooperative, attending a community workshop, and mentoring a small group of young farmers. My time was spent building, guiding, and nurturing, not negotiating with those who would destroy for profit. Night fell, and the orchard glowed under the soft moonlight. I stepped onto the balcony of my apartment, inhaling the scent of fresh herbs and the distant aroma of baked bread from the bakery below. Every tree, every branch, every blossom felt like a small victory. This land, this legacy, was mine to protect. Later, I received a message from Harold. They are beginning to understand. The developers are hesitant now, realizing the legal and logistical hurdles. Lucas and Emily are frustrated, but can't act without risking serious consequences. I smiled quietly. Victory, I realized, wasn't in confrontation. It was in preparation, patience, and unwavering principle. They had underestimated me, assuming a widow of 68 would be timid or weak. Instead, they found a woman fortified by decades of life, love, and labor. As I closed the day, I reflected on Richard's words from years ago. Always protect what matters, Margaret, even when no one else does. Tonight, the orchard slept peacefully, and so did I, confident that tomorrow, like today, I would hold firm, unshaken, unbroken, and in command. Hazelbrook Orchards was safe, and I had shown, quietly but decisively, that the heart of it, like mine, would never be underestimated. A few days later, I sensed that Lucas and Emily were growing desperate. Their calls had become more insistent, their emails increasingly sharp, and Harold confirmed my suspicion. They were running out of time and patience. I knew they would attempt one final maneuver, a direct confrontation, at the orchard itself. True to form, late that afternoon, I spotted their car turning onto the gravel drive. Emily wore her usual polished veneer. Lucas exuded forced confidence. They expected fear or submission. Instead, I met them at the gate with calm authority, dressed in my usual light cardigan and worn boots, hands slightly calloused from morning work. "Mom," Lucas began, attempting the practiced charm that had failed before. "We just want to talk." "About what?" I asked, my voice steady, not betraying a hint of the storm I felt inside. "The orchard. Your obligations, or your own convenience?" Emily stepped forward, trying to soften the tension with a rehearsed smile. "We just want to find a compromise. Surely you can understand our position." I raised a hand. "No. The only position I understand is the orchard's. and it doesn't need compromising. Lucas shifted uneasily. He hadn't expected resistance to be so unshakable. They had counted on intimidation and negotiation tools that worked well in corporate boardrooms. But the orchard was not a corporation, and I was not a naive widow. I calmly gestured for them to follow me toward the main grove. As we walked, I spoke of every tree and every row, telling them the story behind each planting, the water rights tied to each acre, the conservation plans in place, and the young farmers who relied on the cooperative. Their expressions shifted from irritation to unease. They were listening, but not absorbing. They wanted leverage, not legacy. When we reached the central clearing, I stopped. I looked at them with quiet intensity. This land is not for sale. It never was, and it never will be. Every attempt to manipulate, to intimidate, or to seize control will fail. Legally, morally, and physically. I have prepared for every contingency you could imagine, and then some. Emily glanced at Lucas, a flicker of panic in her eyes. They had underestimated the layers of preparation, the foresight, and the knowledge embedded in every deed and document. I reached into my bag and held up the original deed to the additional 20 acres water rights included, like a talisman. "Do you see this?" I asked softly. "Without it, nothing you claim matters. Every argument, every threat, every expectation of control is null. This is your boundary, the law, not negotiation, and I will not compromise it." For a long moment, they said nothing. They realized, finally, that they had been outmaneuvered, not with confrontation, not with force, but with patience, principle, and preparation. They had expected fear. They had expected weakness. Instead, they found a steadfast resolve that neither time nor age could erode. Finally, Lucas spoke, voice low, frustrated. "You won't compromise?" "No," I said, firm but calm. "Not on the orchard. Not on the future it represents. Not on the principles it stands for. You may leave now." They turned silently, returning to their car, defeated but unharmed. I watched them drive away, the dust settling behind them. I closed the gate, inhaling the crisp air scented with apple blossoms and earth. The orchard was mine. My legacy was intact. And most importantly, I had taught them a lesson they would not soon forget, that courage, knowledge, and patience could triumph over greed and entitlement. That evening, I walked among the trees, feeling the heartbeat of the land beneath my feet. Hazelbrook Orchards had endured storms, frost, and human schemes, but it would endure me, and I would endure with it, steadfast, vigilant, and unyielding. The orchard was safe, and so was I. The morning after Lucas and Emily left, Hazelbrook Orchards felt unusually quiet, almost reverent. The early sun cast long shadows between the rows of apple trees, each branch heavy with promise for the coming season. I walked slowly through the orchard, touching the bark of familiar trees, inhaling the scent of earth and blossoms, feeling a profound sense of ownership, not just of land, but of legacy. Harold had already begun finalizing the legal measures. The injunction was now permanent until a full court review confirmed the authenticity of the original deed. Every loophole Lucas and Emily might exploit had been anticipated, but the law was only one layer of protection. The orchard itself, nurtured for decades, was a living fortress of history, memory, and care. By late morning, I made my way to the small office we had built at the edge of the orchard. There, I began drafting a detailed plan for the cooperative and the future of Hazelbrook Orchards. It was no longer just about preventing loss. It was about building something sustainable, something bigger than myself. Young farmers would have access to land, water, and mentorship. Local schools would visit to learn about organic farming. Community workshops would teach skills that were almost disappearing in modern life. preserving fruit, composting, and sustainable irrigation. The first call I made was to Ray Miller at the general store. "Ray," I said warmly, "I want to hold a community meeting this weekend. Can we use the town hall?" Ray chuckled. "Of course, Margaret. People are going to want to hear this. They'll be thrilled." Then came the call to Harold. "We proceed on all fronts," I told him. "The injunction, the cooperative setup, the water trust. I want every part of this documented, secured, and ready to protect the orchard for generations." Harold's voice carried quiet admiration. "You've done everything right. The orchard will be safe, and your children's actions will no longer matter." As the days turned into weeks, the orchard buzzed with new energy. Young farmers arrived, eager to learn. Community members came to volunteer and participate. Hazelbrook transformed from a private sanctuary into a hub of activity, life, and education. The past tension faded, replaced by a sense of purpose and continuity. One evening, standing on the porch of my modest apartment above the bakery, I watched the sunset paint the sky in soft orange and pink hues. The orchard below glowed in golden light. I thought of Richard, of the decades we had spent cultivating life here together, and I allowed myself a small private smile. The orchard had survived storms, frost, and human greed. Now it would thrive. And as for Lucas and Emily, they remained distant, their schemes dismantled not through confrontation, but through foresight, patience, and unwavering integrity. They had learned that legacy cannot be stolen by force or entitlement. It is earned through dedication, vision, and respect. I sat on my balcony, sipping tea, listening to the soft murmur of the town below. The orchard had become more than land. It was a living testament to resilience, care, and the enduring power of right action. I had fought for it, protected it, and now, finally, it belonged to the future. Margaret Lynn Harper smiled quietly to herself. The orchard was safe, the legacy was secure, and she was, at last, at peace. Legacy preserved, peace earned,